All right, thanks everybody for joining again. We've got a great video here today. We're going to be talking a little bit about Power Platform governance and kind of an overview of all the stuff that goes into it. I've got Garrett Pierce here with me today to talk about governance and how we think it should be run, why it's important, what are the major areas, what are the things that we need to do in order to know that our Power Platform ecosystem, or our whole tenant, is effectively managed, that our data is secure, that it's available, that things are well run, and that we have effective processes and procedures in place to support an entire enterprise that's trying to adopt it. Not just the dev team that might be building one app in it, right? Not just one core dev team, but an entire enterprise. So I'm glad to have you here, Garrett. Let's kind of dig in.
Yeah.
Let's start with just a top level overview. What are we talking about when we say governance?
Yeah, I think governance is it's an ongoing process. It's not like a one-time thing. It's an ongoing, ever-evolving process of ensuring that the Power Platform workload that you guys are using is used in the organization in a way that is scalable, secure, and well monitored. And there's a number of things that'll go into those three major points.
So scalable, secure, and well monitored. I like that.
Scalable, secure, and well monitored. Yeah. That makes sure that you can, anything that can go wrong is prepared for.
Okay. Well, this seems like a really big topic, right? There's a lot that
Yeah.
goes into that. How do we start to organize our thoughts? Is there a way to we can start to break that down into groups for this?
Yeah. So the way I see it, and I guess we see it, there are five core tenets of the Power Platform governance. First being platform security enablement, then data quality and accessibility, platform monitoring and control, release management, and then support and advocacy.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. So, why don't we let's not beat around the bush. Let's dig right in.
Yeah.
You mentioned security up front. Let's dive in there. What are we talking about? What are we trying to accomplish when it comes to Power Platform security?
Yeah. Well, there's probably information security personnel in your organization, right? And there's a number of things that fall into security and fall into those people's jobs. So you'll want to collaborate with them as Power Platform experts to enforce data loss prevention boundaries, secure environment access, and ensure compliance with security requirements. Because every organization is going to be a little bit different, right? So the security requirements are going to be different per organization, and that's why you need to collaborate with these people, is they have their own specific needs, and you got to hear them out and work together. So we'll jump ahead to how do we actually do that.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So
What kind of actions are we going to undertake? Right. We're a governance
yeah,
team. We're just getting started. We know security is important. We want to collaborate with people, but how do we get started?
yeah. The first and foremost, you're going to want to establish risk assessments and mitigation paths. That means, figuring out where your points of risk might be,
Okay.
and then how do you deal with that? How do you both stop those from happening, and when they do happen, or if they do happen, we'll say, how do you handle that? And so,
So
one of the
prevention
first
and
things,
response. Right.
yes, prevention and response. Yes, so you'll want to be preemptive and I guess postemptive, if that's a word. uh, so yeah, you'll want to do guidelines and rules for makers to follow. That's one of the biggest things, is telling people what they can and can't use, what can and can't access the data that's, and the sensitivity of your data as well. And you want to keep an eye on that. And you want to continually increase user awareness of security standards. Because like I said, this is an evolving, ongoing process. This isn't a one-time thing. You got to keep your users aware of security standards as your data and your business evolves. And
That's
then you
right.
want to
2 years
regularly.
ago, there was no such thing as Copilot security concerns, right?
Exactly. And now it's, the big thing that everybody's talking about.
That's right.
So along with that, you'll also want to regularly review your risks. You'll want to take a, high level look at your whole workload and say, hey, what new risks might have arisen as we've evolved. And then there's a number of Power Platform features that can help you secure things such as, you can go as high level as being in different environments. I know we'll talk about environment strategy down the line a little bit. We've already got a plan for talking about that. But Yeah, I mean, some people, just to give you a little glimpse into it, will do different environments for different types of data, depending on the data sensitivity, your lines of business, and that kind of thing. So, you'll want to go as high level as different environments, or you can even go as granular as individual fields on individual tables. Power Platform has features for those two extremes and everything in between. Um,
And you
and then
might
you'll
even
also,
leverage features that aren't in Power Platform, right? I mean,
Mhm. It's
sometimes
true
you've got
too.
to have data that's so sensitive that storing it in Power Platform might be problematic for some reason, right?
Hmm.
So you might want to store that out in Azure, right? Put it into Blob Store or or a data lake or something or a SQL server that you can control
Exactly.
differently, right?
Yeah, that's true too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you'll want to properly utilize these environments to aid security. So the biggest thing under that is you'll want to avoid using your tenant's default environment. The default environment is kind of the enemy of good governance. Since everybody has access to it and can do a lot of different things in it, it can cause you some problems. So you want to avoid that as much as you can.
Yeah. When we get to managed environments now, right? That's a big help since they introduced managed environments and the ability to start
Yeah.
locking these things down.
Hmm.
Well, I think one of my greatest joys was when I started learning how we could start to lock people out of that default environment and
Yeah.
start to default them to a specific environment and default them to a solution.
Yeah. Um, all right, and then finally, you'll want to use auditing to ensure that your developers and your makers are in compliance with your organization's security standards.
Okay. Well, you're imagining like auditing of the dev teams, right? Of the makers, right? Where we would
Hmm.
say, hey, Maker X, you've got an app. We've seen it in the COE. You've shared it with 55 people. We'd like to sit down and do a code review. We'd like
Yeah,
to sit down and take a
exactly.
look at the data you're keeping in there. We're concerned that there might be, a whole lot of PII that needs to be a little bit more restricted or something like
Yeah,
that.
you might have a lot of data that's, either coming in or going out of your tenant too, in an app, and you want to be aware of that. So that's, going along with, it's a continually evolving process. You'll want to continually audit what your makers and devs are doing.
That's fantastic.
So,
All
yeah.
right, so this is a good overview on the security stuff. I think the next one you mentioned was data quality and accessibility. So
Hmm.
let's talk about that a little bit. What do you mean when you say quality and accessibility? What are we talking about there?
Yeah, quality is ensuring that your data is being treated in the way that your data needs to be treated, as in like your data is representing the right things and not getting out of alignment with your organization's goals.
Hmm.
And then accessibility is making sure that the right people are able to touch the right data. Yeah,
Okay, that's pretty
and
well put.
yeah, thank you.
so, so we're trying to make sure that the data is intact. It's integral, right?
Mhm.
We know what data is being kept, what kind of data, where it is. We have ways of describing that data, and then we have a plan for how we're going to make sure that people can get to it when they need it. Right? When somebody comes to
Mhm.
us and says, "Hey, I need more information about the purchase orders that we are issuing, right? And I need it for this app over here." We want to have a plan so that we can tell them how to get to that data. Oh no, that already exists. Don't make a new app for it. Get it over
Mhm.
here, right?
Yeah. And so
So
in
how
keeping
do we
with
go
that,
about that? What are some actions we can do in order to do that?
yeah, in keeping with that, data dictionaries are going to be huge in terms of understanding your organization's data. That's, something that defines what your data is, where it sits, and what can be done with it. And then you'll also want to keep an eye on your data model, kind of in keeping with that as well. You'll want to keep an eye on that and make sure that your data model is kind of staying within the bounds that you all have set for your organization.
Okay. Can you tell me more about the data model? Like, what do we mean when we're saying the data model should stay in the bounds of what we set?
Yeah.
Um, we're talking about like data types or the descriptions. Are we talking about like are we getting down to that level? Right? Hey, if you've added a field, there's got to be a description on that field on that column you've added to a table. That kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. And you want to make sure that like everybody is aware of how the data is structured and what the data represents
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point, right? The structure matters, right? A lot of
Hmm.
times we we engage in, because Power Platform is designed to be an interactive database, right? It's not necessarily maximally or maximally normalized, right? Sometimes we replicate data on multiple records, right? For the ease
Yeah.
of use or ease of interaction, right? Sometimes that's more important than optimizing data storage. So I guess documenting that so that people know, oh yeah, this field over here, that's the same thing as as the sum of these fields over here. That's useful stuff. Good.
Yeah. You'll also want to keep I mean, in keeping with these further or first two goals, you want to, make sure your users are trained on proper data entry procedures so they're not, putting the wrong things in wrong fields or, making things that are totally blown out of proportion or something like that. You want to make sure that everything's kind of sticking where it needs to be. Yeah.
That's right. Garbage in, garbage out, right?
Exactly. You only want good stuff out. So, how do you get that good stuff in? You'll also want to take a look at appropriate storage solutions and direct users to approved storage solutions. And then, educate those users on the storage solutions that you've selected, on the features and security measures that are built into those storage solutions.
Okay. So we're talking about hey, SharePoint is for this, and Power Platform is for this. A Dataverse database is for this, and
Yeah.
if you have a this, then you should do it this way. That kind of thing. And
Yeah.
always use Excel because it's an enterprise ready database, right?
Yeah. I feel like that's probably after default environment. Don't use Excel. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, in things such as security roles too, there's, all sorts of security mechanisms within, these different storage solutions. SharePoint has its set of things, and then, Power Platform obviously has its security roles, that kind of thing. So you want to keep an eye on that and make sure users know. And then finally, one of the biggest points in governance overall is data loss prevention policies. You'll hear this talked about quite a bit. Usually is DLP policies. But yeah, that is resources that can be grouped together in certain ways and approved to make sure that they are accessing and modifying data appropriately so that your data isn't going out or leaking into a place where it shouldn't be, and inappropriate data isn't coming in. So
Yep, absolutely. Hey, I'm noticing already here, we're on the second topic, I'm noticing that there's a lot of tie-ins between these topics, right? You've called back to the security topic a couple of times already. Is that a common theme?
yeah, you'll see this probably quite a bit, that it's more of a web, I think, than anything else. A web where a certain node may touch a bunch of other things, and it all kind of ties together. So, and especially you'll see this as well as we go along, that certain things that you do will affect other things that you may not be aware of. So we'll definitely talk about that when we get to environment strategy. That like an environment strategy is affected by various choices that you're going to make, and yeah, it's all connected
That's
in a
fantastic.
big way.
It
Yeah.
makes it important to have these discussions, right? To make sure that
Yeah.
we're talking it through, together, so we can come up with a cohesive plan, something that integrates all the different stakeholder groups in your enterprise. Good
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
All right, so
S-
monitor and control. Okay, so monitor and control. Let's talk about that then. What do you mean when you talk about platform monitoring and controlling?
Yeah, it's proactive monitoring of users and the apps that they use, and of course your automations and your data to make sure that things are done in a way that is consistent, compliant, and scalable. So yeah, that's there's all sorts of mechanisms in Power Platform and SharePoint and any pretty much any Microsoft integrated product that you'll use that can make sure that you're keeping an eye on what users' actions actually are. Um, so the first thing you'll probably hear, well, actually, you'll definitely be hearing us um, talk about the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. There's a ton of tools within that. I won't go through all of them right now because that's actually our next video. But there's a bunch of tools inside of that that will help to ensure that apps are being used properly, and can help users to make sure that apps are being used properly.
Yeah. Praise be to the PowerCat team for creating that one.
Mm-hmm. Amen to that.
So
There's
what are
also
some of your top tools that you would recommend? I don't need you to get into a ton of
yeah
detail, but what are some of the top ones in that COE starter kit that you think people
yeah
should know about?
Yeah, I mean, the dashboards will provide you a pretty heavy overview of what the apps are doing and, who has access to them, how many people are using them, and what data they touch, what data goes in and out. Similarly, with like app audit, you can gather all sorts of informations on the impact that apps are having, and, you know, get recommendations on whether or not those apps can be put out to pasture or better secured. And yeah, like I said, there's Power BI too, and it provides you a ton of details on app usage and everything going on within your tenant. So yeah,
Yeah, I like your comment about put out to pasture. I think that's incredibly important. I'm old enough to
hmm
remember projects that touched Lotus Notes, and the kind of tangled web that Lotus Notes used to create in enterprises, because it was another kind of low code citizen developer kind of tool,
hmm
right? In a previous age. But the way it got adopted by a lot of enterprises, there was never a control. There was never a central monitoring point,
yeah,
and it kind of spiraled out of control. You had enterprises with hundreds or even thousands of these Lotus Notes apps out there, and they had no idea what was in them. Can I turn this one off? I don't know. I don't know if anyone's using it. I don't know if it's
yeah.
got mission critical data in it. That's what we're trying to avoid here, right? By controlling those.
And that's a huge point where governance becomes very, very important. You don't want your Power Platform enterprise to turn out that way. You want to make sure you know what's going on and you know who's using what and what those apps are doing. And yeah. So kind of along with that, there's also monitoring and alerting tools within the Power Platform that can notify important personnel of issues that might pop up, um, and helps you to actually preempt failures. And then if a failure does happen, it will also help you to understand what happened and what caused the failure after the fact.
Okay, cool. What kind of failures are you thinking? You're thinking like flows that fail to run or plugins that error out?
Yeah, I mean it can be as small as those, or it can be as big as there's some major failure in your data sources or something like that. I mean,
Okay.
there's all kinds
Good.
of yeah, it covers a lot of ground, which is good. And then yeah, I think it's about it
Yeah.
for platform monitoring. Yeah,
Okay, that makes sense. All right. Well, let's talk release management then. Right. You
yeah,
mentioned Avalon. That's a near and dear to my heart. I love. I'm an ALM enthusiast. I'm
hmm
a strong believer. I work almost always on massive enterprise projects, and these things kind of spiral out of control when people don't give this due attention in advance. So tell me
yeah.
about like what do you think are the top level things? What are we talking about in release management?
Yeah, I mean, you want to kind of establish a process that's both easy for a developer to follow and, um, easy for your deployment people to follow as well, so that your architecture and all that kind of stuff can stay together while still being updated regularly. And so for that, um, yeah, you want to enable your makers to actually have and use a proper release management process.
Mm-hmm.
That encompasses a bunch of things. It encompasses code reviews and testing that can both be automated and humanized at the same time. You can either, you can do both, or you can do one or the other. I'd probably stick with having a little bit of human element, but there is of course automation that can make the human element even easier.
That's right, and that's important, right? Easier is the word. When it's a
hmm
large application, um, totally automated almost never happens, right? It's
Yeah.
push button deployment is really hard to get to.
hmm
There's so often something that comes up that just requires some kind of manual intervention. But I think
Yeah.
you're right. Automation is something that can make it easier, provided you've already done the work to make sure that those interventions are the exception and not the norm,
Yeah.
right?
Right, and that kind of goes along with the point about automating deployment and other software development workflows. You want to make sure that, you can consistently be doing these sorts of things because you probably want to update fairly regularly. That's an important part of release management actually is release cadence. You can see as a point down there. You want to be updating regularly and you want to have a plan. You want to have adequate testing and all that kind of stuff. And that can happen with, your deployment pipelines if we're going to get a little granular into features. and it makes it for a way that is consistent and easy for a developer to regularly follow. And like you said, push button deployment is kind of the goal, right? And that would be the optimal situation where a developer can push a button and have a lot of the difficult stuff taken care of, so that you're limiting the amount of, or limiting the potential of human error.
Yeah, that's the holy grail, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk release strategy. You've got some stuff on here. How does that differ from the actual deployments? We've been talking about deployment, the technical process. It looks like your bullets on release strategy are not about that. They're about the stuff that comes
Yeah.
before. Tell me more.
It's much more high level than just the actual deployment process. So you want to make sure that everything's tested. You want to put your software features through rigorous testing and make sure that you've caught as much as you possibly can. I mean, you can't necessarily catch everything, but you can try to catch a lot of things, right? And so you want to make sure that things are tested adequately, and then you also want release cadence. Like you develop a plan, you develop a strategy, and say, oh, either we're going to deploy every other week or every week, or that kind of thing, or maybe you so choose, and I wouldn't recommend this, but you so choose to deploy a huge package all at once. That's something you can do too, but again, not necessarily recommended. Things like deploying on a Friday. Do you want to do that? Do you not want to do that? This is all very important. And then feature planning. Or sorry, did you have something to say?
No, I was just agreeing. I was thinking, I was in a deployment recently that happened on a Friday, and it kind of wrecked my weekend. Did you want to do
Yeah.
it? Well, maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe not. As unpleasant as deploying on a Monday morning sound, it may actually be for the better. um, yeah. And then feature planning. You want to make sure that your users are aware of what's going to be coming to them in terms of new features and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
All right, fantastic. And so all of this as like actions of governance. Let's put that back into context, because I think a lot of people think about deployment and release planning and so on as an individual dev team action. So what we're saying here is that it's not the dev team's responsibility. It's
Yeah.
their responsibility in concert with some kind of a governance level above that. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, because that'll ensure that you're kind of keeping in compliance with your whole governance strategy. If the governance people have had a hand in crafting your release management strategy, then you're in keeping with the governance strategy, and it's all
Right.
working. Yeah, it's working in tandem, I guess, or in concert, as you said. Yeah.
Right. And you know that your testing and your cadence and your feature planning and everything is in lockstep with the other dev teams that are out there, and you don't need to worry about what they're doing. You know that your stuff is aligned with it, right?
Yeah, and that's actually, you make a good point there that I don't think we brought up before. But governance is trying to help your enterprise work with a bunch of devs that are all kind of doing disparate things, but
Right.
they want to all come together in a way that gels really nicely, and you want to make sure that they're all kind of keeping to the same standards and complying to all that sort of stuff. So
That's
yeah,
fantastic. All right, so what's next? We've talked about several different topics. Next is support and advocacy. This is interesting. All
yeah.
right, so what do you mean when you talk about support and advocacy?
Well, kind of like I just said with the devs, you have disparate devs working on a whole bunch of different things. If you want to bring them all together, how do you do that, right? How do you support them in the goal of bringing them all together? Well, you can provide training and documentation and community building activities to support building all these applications and that sort of thing. So you make sure your devs are aware of, hey, this is the way that we do things. This is the way we deploy things. This is what you're allowed to use in terms of data connectors. This is what you're not allowed to use. All those sorts of rules and that kind of thing. They need to be documented, and your makers and your devs need to be trained on that sort of thing.
I like that. I like that. So the support and advocacy, I talked a minute ago when we were talking about releases, I talked about, some kind of governance on top, but maybe that's not the right way to think about it. Maybe governance is the platform that these dev teams stand on, something that helps them to reach higher. It's not something
Yeah.
that's, coming down from above. I like
Right.
that.
Yeah. And so how do you do that? Well, you create and you promote proper documentation. You have developers create documentation of what they're building, and then you also, as the governance people, create documentation so the developers know what they're doing. And, if developers have well created documentation, then that can ease operations and maintenance work. So, if something goes wrong, but that failure is already well documented in the developer's documentation, well then it might be pretty easy to get things back on track. And then you can also documentation goes both ways. So you can also make sure that they have access to Microsoft documentation and, working with best practices in app creation and that sort of thing. Because Microsoft documentation covers, I don't know, just about
So
everything you'd want it to cover. Yeah.
that's right. And so many people just don't think to go to MS Learn. They got a question and they don't think,
Mhm.
hey, maybe I should just see if it's documented. When there was
Yeah,
definitely a time when the Microsoft documentation was weak, but it's definitely a lot better than it used to be.
it has changed. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then you want to provide education as well. You can have, Microsoft certified professionals training and educating your users to help them build all sorts of things and build better, most importantly. You can also direct them to useful online resources. I mean, there's stuff like Udemy, there's, um, all kinds of Dynamics specific or Power Platform specific educational resources out there to help you develop apps better. And you can encourage them to obtain Microsoft certifications. The Microsoft certifications, I mean, I have a handful. I think you do as well.
I've had one or
That,
two in the past.
yeah, yeah. But they help you to make sure that you're up on best practices and up to date on, the features and that kind of
That's
thing.
right.
So
And there are a lot of them now, right? It used to
a
be just,
ton.
hey, you're either Power Platform certified or you're not, right? But now
Yeah.
there's so many different levels. Even people who are just non-coder. All I do is Canvas apps. There are still certifications out there for you, right?
Yeah.
Things to think about that help you to envision and structure your learning in the platform. I think that's the key
Hmm.
thing, right? Who cares about the piece of paper at the end? It's the learning you get along the way to earning that piece of paper that
Yeah,
matters.
because that's a huge part of it is they have these structured learning paths, and I don't know if you're somebody like me, that is actually really really helpful because there's so much to learn. But if you're able to kind of walk down a defined road to learning that kind of stuff, well, it makes it so much easier. So yeah,
Awesome, awesome. All right, so I think those are all the pillars that you talked about, right? Those are
hmm
all the key principles.
yep, those are our five
That's
pillars. That's all we
fantastic. This is
have
a
for
good
today.
overview. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we got a couple more things coming up. We got some stuff on the COE starter kit. We've got a little bit on environment strategy. We've talked security best practices. We got a lot in the hopper here. So,
That's
well,
fantastic.
we hope to see you all soon, and we hope you enjoyed today's video. Thank you.
Thanks, Garrett. Thanks everybody for watching.
All right, thanks everyone. Bye.